The Zyrek fleet drifted through the void, their massive warships forming an unbreakable wall of firepower. Their empire had ruled this sector for centuries, crushing rebellions, erasing civilizations, and ensuring that no one dared to challenge their dominance. The stars belonged to them, or so they believed. Commander Volker stood on the bridge of the Zyrek dreadnought Bloodfang, watching the vast emptiness of space through the reinforced viewport. The patrol had been routine, dull even. There had been no threats in this region for decades. The few remaining species in the sector either obeyed or had been wiped from history. He sighed, running his claws across the control panel. The universe had grown quiet, and for the Zyrek, silence meant control. Then the silence broke. A flashing alert on the sensor grid made Volker frown. One of the operators, a young officer, hesitated before speaking. "Commander, we have something. An unidentified vessel moving toward our position." Volker raised an eyebrow. "A vessel? Where did it come from?" The officer checked again. "Unknown, sir. It wasn't there a moment ago." That was impossible. The Zyrek's sensor technology could detect a ship from light years away. No vessel could simply appear without warning. "Show me." The screen flickered, and there it was. A single warship, dark against the void, moving slowly but directly toward the fleet. It wasn't broadcasting any signals. No ID codes, no hails. Just a ghost, gliding through the darkness. Volker narrowed his eyes. "Run a deep scan." The scanning officer pressed a series of buttons. A second later, he stiffened. "Sir, our sensors can't get a reading. The ship is there, but it's like it's absorbing our scans. No mass, no power signature, no life signs." A murmur spread across the bridge. That wasn't possible. Every ship left a signature, energy output, radiation, at least a hull composition reading. But this one, it was nothing but a shadow. Volker straightened. "Send a message. Identify yourself, or we will consider you hostile." The transmission was sent. No reply. "Maybe their comms are down," one officer suggested. Volker shook his head. No, this was something else. His instincts, honed through years of warfare, whispered a warning in his mind. Something about this ship felt wrong. "Prepare weapons," he ordered. "A warning shot. Let them know we're not to be ignored." One of the Zyrek cruisers powered up its forward plasma cannons. A bolt of burning energy ripped through the void, aimed just ahead of the mysterious warship. The plasma blast illuminated the darkness for a brief second, then vanished. Gasps filled the bridge. "What happened?" Volker demanded. The gunner checked his instruments. "Sir, it didn't miss. The shot was absorbed. The ship just took it." Volker's claws clenched into a fist. "That's impossible. No ship can do that." And yet, the evidence was right in front of them. The mysterious warship didn't even slow down. It continued its silent approach, unaffected by the Zyrek's firepower. The bridge grew colder, the crew's nervous energy turning into something deeper. "Fear. Send a fleet-wide alert," Volker ordered. "All ships on high alert. Defensive positions." The Zyrek fleet shifted, forming a combat formation around Bloodfang. Cannons turned, shields powered up, targeting systems locked onto the approaching warship. And yet, the unknown vessel did nothing. It simply drifted forward, silent, calm, unstoppable. "Maybe it's abandoned," one officer whispered. "A derelict?" Volker doubted that. Something about this ship felt too deliberate, too precise in its movements. It wasn't wandering. It was choosing its path. Then, without warning, the ship vanished. 1 second, it was on their screens. The next, gone. Where did it go? Volker barked. The scanning officer was frantically pressing controls. "Sir, I don't know." One moment it was there. And then, an alert blared across the bridge. A red light pulsed on the screen. The unknown ship had reappeared, not in front of them, but behind their formation. It had bypassed them completely. The Xyric officers froze. That wasn't possible. No ship could move that fast, let alone without being detected. But there it was, now sitting right in the heart of the fleet, among them, as if it had always been there. A cold shiver ran down Voker's spine. Turn us around. Target that ship. Now. Bloodfang's massive engines roared to life as the Xyric fleet twisted to face the intruder. But just as their weapons locked on, something changed. For the first time, the warship reacted. The void itself seemed to ripple around it. Dark energy flared along its hull, and the ship's silhouette shifted, almost like it was becoming something more than metal, more than technology. Then, their systems died. All at once, the Xyric fleet's power flickered. Weapons, shields, engines, everything shut down. The mighty armada, the terror of the galaxy, was left drifting in the dark. Panic erupted across the bridge. Officers scrambled to restore controls, but their consoles were dead. Sir, we've lost everything. Voker's mind raced. He had seen countless battles, faced overwhelming odds, but never had he felt so helpless. Then, for the first time, the unknown ship sent a signal. Not words, not a message, a single sound, a deep, inhuman hum resonating across every Xyric ship, vibrating through their hulls, through their bones, a sound that didn't belong in space, a warning. And in that moment, Voker finally understood. This was no ordinary warship. This was something else. Something the galaxy was never meant to face, and it had just arrived. The bridge of Bloodfang remained eerily silent, save for the ominous hum that echoed through the ship's structure. The sound wasn't just noise. It was something deeper, something unnatural. It vibrated in their chests, rattled their bones, and for the first time in his career, Commander Voker felt fear. The Xyric were conquerors. They had never encountered a force they couldn't defeat, a fleet they couldn't burn to ash. But this wasn't war. This was something else, something unknown. Restore power. Now. Voker barked, snapping his officers out of their frozen state. His crew scrambled, pressing buttons, trying every emergency restart command they had. But nothing worked. Every system remained dead. One of the officers, a veteran with decades of experience, was breathing heavily. His claws twitched over his console. Commander, this isn't a normal shutdown. Something is holding us in place. Voker turned to the viewport, staring at the silent warship now floating among them. It had done nothing, yet it had rendered an entire fleet powerless. His gut twisted. What are we dealing with? The scanning officer was still desperately working, sweat beading on his scaled brow. Sir, I don't know how to explain this, but our sensors are picking up something. It's not energy, not radiation, but it's alive. Voker's claws gripped the railing. That ship is alive. The officer shook his head. Not the ship itself, but something inside it, or maybe something controlling it. Before Voker could respond, the unknown ship moved. It was subtle at first, a simple shift in position. Then, in an instant, it was gone. Not moving, not accelerating, just gone. Gasps filled the bridge. Where did it go? I don't know, sir. It just disappeared from our scanners again. Voker clenched his teeth. It's toying with us. Then, a new alert blared. The Xyric fleet's power flickered back on, not all at once, but in sections, one ship at a time, random systems reactivating on their own. But instead of relief, the officers felt something far worse. Sir, the communications officer whispered, her voice barely above a breath. It's in our systems. Voker's blood ran cold. The unknown ship wasn't just disabling their fleet. It was inside their technology. A chilling realization settled over the bridge. They weren't hunting this warship. It was studying them. Then, the first explosion ripped through the fleet. The explosion lit up the void, a fiery burst consuming one of the Xyric warships. The crew of Bloodfang barely had time to react before another ship erupted into flames. The Xyric fleet, once a symbol of unstoppable power, was now under attack, but there was no enemy in sight. "Where is the fire coming from?" Volker roared, gripping the console as the dreadnought shook from the shockwave of the nearby destruction. The tactical officer's claws trembled over his controls. "Sir, we don't know. The attacks aren't registering on our scanners." Another blast, this time from the right flank. A Xyric battleship split apart. Its hull ruptured as though an invisible force had ripped it open. Panic spread across the fleet. The Xyric were warriors, but they had never fought ghosts. Then the unknown warship reappeared. It was no longer drifting silently. It was moving. Fast. 1 second, it was near the burning wreckage of a destroyed cruiser. The next, it was directly above Bloodfang. Shields up. All weapons fire. The Xyric fleet unleashed hell. Plasma cannons roared, missiles launched. Energy beams surged through the void. Every ship fired at the same time, the space around the unknown vessel turning into a storm of destruction. For a brief moment, Volker thought they had done it. No ship could survive such an overwhelming attack. Then the smoke cleared, and the warship was still there, untouched. No shields, no evasive maneuvers. It had simply absorbed the full force of the Xyric's might. The bridge fell into a horrified silence. Then the unknown warship retaliated. It didn't fire weapons. There were no plasma bolts, no missiles, no beams of energy. Instead, a wave of black energy pulsed outward, sweeping through the fleet like a silent storm. One by one, Xyric ships lost power again. But this time, they didn't just shut down. They collapsed. Metal twisted like paper, entire hulls folding inward as if the ships were being crushed by an unseen force. The mighty Xyric battleships, each one capable of destroying planets, were now dying without a single shot being fired. Volker staggered back. What is this thing? No one had an answer. The Xyric fleet had always been the hunters. But tonight, they were the prey. The Xyric fleet was in chaos. Admiral Volker stood frozen, his claws gripping the edge of the control panel. This was impossible. His fleet, one of the largest ever assembled, was being torn apart, not by weapons or strategy, but by a force they could not comprehend. "Emergency retreat," he barked. "All ships, pull back." The command echoed through the fleet. Engines flared as warships tried to break formation and escape, but it was already too late. The human warship moved again. One moment it was hovering in place. The next, it was inside their fleet, weaving through the battlefield with an impossible speed. No Xyric ship could lock onto it. No weapon could track it. Then the erasure began. One by one, ships vanished. No explosions, no debris, just gone. "Report," Volker roared. His tactical officer was staring at the screen, his scales pale with fear. "Sir, I don't understand. The ships aren't being destroyed. They're being—" He swallowed. "Removed." Volker's blood ran cold. Another warship disappeared, then another, and another. The Xyric Empire's greatest fleet, a force that had crushed entire civilizations, was being unmade in real time. The bridge crew trembled. Some warriors fell to their knees, whispering prayers to the war gods. Others stood frozen, their instincts screaming at them to run, but knowing there was nowhere to go. Then, for the first time since the battle began, the human warship sent a message. A deep mechanical voice echoed through every Xyric warship, calm but filled with something far worse than rage. "You are unworthy." The bridge shook violently. Lights flickered. The walls trembled as if the ship itself could feel what was coming. And then the Xyric dreadnought, Bloodfang, began to disappear. Not explode, not shatter, erase. Volker watched in horror as the control panels faded under his claws. The walls of the ship turned to dust. His crew vanished before his eyes. one by one, until only he remained. The last thing Admiral Volker saw before the void claimed him was the warship, silent, unshaken, continuing its slow, deliberate path toward the Xyrek homeworld. And for the first time in history, the Xeric Empire knew true fear. The Xyrek homeworld, Sarvok Prime, was a fortress unlike any other. Massive orbital defense stations hovered above its surface, each one armed with enough firepower to reduce moons to dust. Dreadnoughts, the largest warships in the Empire, patrolled the skies, their cannons primed and ready. The planet itself was covered in vast cities, each one a testament to Xeric dominance. Billions of warriors, scientists, and rulers lived here, confident that nothing could ever threaten their empire. Until now. The Supreme Chancellor, Selvar, stood in the war room of the Imperial Command Center, surrounded by his highest-ranking generals and strategists. A massive holographic display showed the battlefield. A single red dot moved toward the planet. The human warship. It had annihilated the Xyrek battle fleet. Now it was coming straight for the heart of the Empire. Zelvar's claws tightened behind his back. Status report. An officer swallowed hard. Chancellor, we have confirmed the loss of every ship in Admiral Volker's fleet. We received one last transmission before the Bloodfang was erased. He hesitated. It was a message, sir, from them. The chamber fell silent. Selvar narrowed his eyes. Play it. The officer pressed a button, and a deep, synthetic voice filled the room. You are unworthy. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. A warlord stepped forward, his tail thrashing in frustration. Enough of this madness. We are the Xyrek Empire. We do not cower before a single warship. Activate the planetary defense grid. Deploy every dreadnought we have. If this thing wants a fight, we will give it one. The command was given. Every Xyrek warship in the system powered up their engines. Thousands of planetary defense cannons locked onto the approaching target. The combined firepower of the Xyrek homeworld, the might of an empire that had ruled for centuries, was ready. Then the human warship entered orbit. No transmission, no response, just silence. Selvar's breath caught in his throat. The warship wasn't moving like any fleet he had ever encountered. It didn't adjust its course. It didn't slow down. It simply continued forward, as if nothing in the galaxy could stop it. And then the Xeric unleashed everything. Thousands of plasma bolts and kinetic rounds streaked through the void. Torpedoes locked onto the warship. Energy beams fired in concentrated, deadly bursts. The sheer amount of firepower pouring into a single target was unimaginable. For a moment, Sarvok Prime's skies were filled with blinding light. Then the smoke cleared, and the warship was still there, untouched. No shields flickered, no armor burned. The attacks had done nothing. Zelvar's heart pounded. His empire's greatest weapons had just failed. The chamber was filled with stunned silence. No one spoke. No one could. And then the warship responded. It did not fire weapons. It did not launch an attack. Instead, it pulsed. A wave of black energy spread outward, sweeping across the entire planetary defense grid. And just like before, the Xyrek warships began to vanish. One by one, dreadnoughts disappeared. Orbital defense stations simply ceased to exist. Entire battle formations, destroyers, cruisers, interceptors were erased from reality. Panic erupted. Officers screamed into their communication devices, begging for reinforcements that would never come. Zelvar stared in horror as the unthinkable happened. The Xeric Empire's strongest defenses had been wiped away in seconds. And the warship was still coming. Now nothing stood between it and Sarvok Prime. Panic consumed Sarvok Prime. For the first time in the history of the Xeric Empire, their homeworld was defenseless. The warship had effortlessly erased the mighty fleet meant to protect the planet. Dreadnoughts, orbital stations, planetary defenses, all gone. Now nothing stood between the Zyrek and whatever this unstoppable force planned to do next. Inside the Imperial Command Center, Supreme Chancellor Xelvar could feel the fear in the air. Generals barked orders at communication consoles that no longer responded. Officers frantically recalibrated scanners, trying to understand how an entire battle fleet had been erased without a trace. Yet, through it all, the warship remained silent. It simply hovered above the planet, massive and immovable, like a god gazing down at those it had judged. Xelvar's claws trembled as he stared at the main screen. The warship's presence felt wrong. It wasn't just an enemy vessel. It wasn't just a superior war machine. It was something else, something beyond them. His advisors broke into chaos. "We have to surrender," one shouted. "We cannot fight this." "Never," a warlord bellowed. "We are the Zyrek Empire. We do not bow to an unknown enemy." Xelvar slammed his fist onto the war table, silencing them. Enough. His voice was firm, but inside, doubt clawed at him. "We must establish communication. We need to know what it wants." The room held its breath as the communication officer hesitated, then sent a transmission. "Unidentified vessel. This is Supreme Chancellor Xelvar of the Zyrek Empire. We request communication. State your purpose." Seconds passed. Then, for the first time, the warship spoke. A deep mechanical voice echoed across every Zyrek communication system, from the command center to the smallest datapads in the streets. "Judgment has come." A chill ran through every Zyrek's body. Then, the warship moved. Slowly, deliberately, it descended toward the planet. Zarvok Prime's capital city, home to billions of Zyrek, was directly below. The Supreme Chancellor's breath caught in his throat. "Activate planetary evacuation protocols," he shouted. Now, sirens blared across the city. Ships launched into the sky, desperate to flee. But as the first transports lifted off, the warship released another pulse. And just like before, the escaping ships vanished. Not destroyed, not shot down. Simply gone. Across the city, panic erupted. Zyrek civilians trampled over each other, screaming in terror as they realized there was no escape. Xelvar felt his strength leave him. This was the end. But why? Why had this warship come? Why had it targeted them? Then, the voice spoke again. "For every world you burned, for every species you silenced, now you face the fate you forced upon others." Xelvar's eyes widened in horror. It wasn't just a warship. It was a reckoning. The sky burned black. Zarvok Prime, the jewel of the Zyrek Empire, lay beneath the shadow of the warship. Every eye, soldier, officer, civilian, was fixed on the massive, silent vessel that had erased their entire defense force without a single shot. The streets were filled with panic. Zyrek warriors, once feared across the galaxy, now ran like prey. Sirens howled. Families clung to each other, whispering desperate prayers to gods who would not answer. In the Imperial Command Center, Supreme Chancellor Xelvar stood motionless. The warship's last words still echoed in his mind. "For every world you burned, for every species you silenced, now you face the fate you forced upon others." Xelvar had led countless campaigns against weaker civilizations. Planets had begged for mercy, only to be turned to ash by Zyrek fleets. He had watched alien worlds burn from the safety of his throne, never once thinking that the day of reckoning would come for his own people. But now, here it was. The warship pulsed again. This time, it did not erase. Instead, the entire planet shook. Buildings trembled. Massive towers collapsed in on themselves, crumbling like sandcastles before an unstoppable wave. Great Zyrek statues, monuments to their conquests, split apart and fell into the streets. Xelvar's claws dug into the war table. "What is it doing?" he demanded. The science officer's voice was a broken whisper. "Sir, the planet. It's destabilizing. Zelvar's throat tightened. The warship was not merely destroying their military. It was undoing their very existence. Another pulse. More buildings fell. The ground cracked open, deep fissures ripping through the once glorious capital. Fire burst from the depths of the planet as tectonic plates shifted violently. The Zyrek homeworld, once a thriving empire, was collapsing from within. This cannot be. A general howled, slamming his fists against the table. We are HFY. We've seen NOTFLO like this. No one answered. Outside, billions screamed. Zelvar turned toward the main screen. He knew what was coming. He had seen this before. Entire species had perished under his orders, their civilizations reduced to dust. The Zyrek had once stood above all. Now, they were learning what it felt like to be powerless. With shaking hands, he activated the planet-wide emergency broadcast system. His voice echoed across the world. This is Supreme Chancellor Zelvar. I issue a formal surrender. We will lay down all arms. The warship interrupted. There is no surrender. The words crushed him. Zelvar's knees buckled. His people wailed in despair. The Zyrek had spent centuries making sure that no enemy could ever challenge them. They had believed themselves to be invincible. And yet, against this thing, all their weapons, their fleets, their power, had meant nothing. The warship pulsed one last time. The sky turned white. And the Zyrek Empire ceased to exist. The Zyrek Empire was gone. The great cities of HFY Prime had crumbled into dust. The once proud fleets, feared across the galaxy, had been erased without a trace. Billions of Zyrek lives, warriors, leaders, civilians, had vanished into the void, their existence wiped away as if they had never been. But the warship remained. It hovered in the empty sky, its black surface untouched by the destruction it had unleashed. It did not gloat. It did not celebrate. It simply existed, as if it were a force of the universe itself, neither merciful nor cruel. And then, for the first time since the annihilation began, the warship moved on. It left HFY Prime, a dead world, its surface cracked, its cities reduced to rubble, and entered the darkness of space once more. It had done what it came to do. Yet, across the galaxy, the true impact had just begun. News of the Zyrek Empire's fall spread like wildfire. Across thousands of worlds, in hidden resistance bunkers and war-ravaged colonies, former slaves of the Zyrek watched the footage in stunned silence. The invincible empire, the unstoppable conquerors, the monsters who had ruled with an iron fist for centuries, had been erased in a single day. Some cheered, some fell to their knees, overwhelmed with emotion. Others simply could not comprehend it. The Zyrek were gone, and the warship that had done it. No one knew where it had come from. No distress signal had been sent. No desperate cry for help had reached an unknown savior. The humans, who had stayed neutral in the great wars of the past, had never sent an armada or joined an alliance. They had simply sent one warship, and that was enough. In the distant halls of power, fear gripped the other galactic empires. The Supreme Council of the Celari Dominion, a civilization that had once traded with the Zyrek, held an emergency session. Holograms of their highest officials flickered in a massive chamber, their bioluminescent skin pulsing with unease. One of them, a high-ranking diplomat, finally spoke. The Zyrek are no more. Not conquered, not defeated, erased. Another official, his voice shaking, added, "If the humans could do this to the Zyrek, then..." The chamber fell silent. The implication was clear. If humanity could erase the most feared empire in the galaxy, then no one was safe. But the truth was even worse. They didn't know if the humans had done this as a warning or as a beginning. Meanwhile, deep in an unknown sector of space, the warship continued its journey, silent as ever. Inside, A single message flashed across its dark consoles. Tarji he eat lemon in 8ED. Awaiting next direct IT. A pause. Then, another message appeared. New priority ace acquired. Scanning you for hostile species. The ship altered its course, adjusting its trajectory toward a new set of coordinates. Somewhere, across the stars, another empire had just been judged. And soon, they would learn what it meant to face humanity's warship. The warship moved through the endless void of space, silent and unstoppable. Its black hull reflected no light, and no sensors could detect its presence unless it wanted to be seen. The destruction of the Xyric Empire was already spreading through the galaxy like a wildfire, shaking the foundations of power. But for the warship, its mission was not over. A new target had been identified. The Galactic Council was in chaos. Representatives from hundreds of species had gathered in the Grand Assembly, their holographic projections flickering with distress. The fall of the Xyric had shattered the balance of power, and now fear had gripped the rulers of the galaxy. The Xylari Dominion, the Vortec Alliance, the Grath Consortium, all of them had once cowered before the Xyric. But now, there was something far worse among the stars. Humanity has made its move. A Xylari official shouted. His translucent skin glowed with anxiety. They stayed silent for centuries. But now they have sent their weapon of destruction into the galaxy. We must prepare. Prepare for what? A Vortec warlord growled. His massive, armored frame trembled with unease. We do not even understand what we are facing. A single warship wiped out the Xyric homeworld. An empire of conquerors destroyed without a fight. How do you prepare for something like that? Silence filled the chamber. No one had an answer. Then the Grath representative, a species known for their cold logic, spoke in a voice like rustling metal. We must know what humanity wants. We must establish communication before it is too late. But the Xylari official shook his head. You don't understand. This isn't diplomacy. This isn't war. His glowing eyes dimmed. This is judgment, and we don't know who will be next. Meanwhile, in the depths of space, a new planet came into view. The warship slowed as it approached the Threx Dominion, an empire built on the backs of slaves. The Threx had thrived by raiding weaker species, taking their resources, and breaking them into servitude. And now, they had been chosen. Inside the warship, its systems scanned the planet. Thousands of slave camps were detected. Entire cities built on suffering. The warship did not hesitate. It sent the first pulse. In an instant, every energy shield, every planetary defense system, collapsed. The Threx leaders screamed in confusion as their mighty fortresses became exposed. A second pulse followed. Weapons, ships, and communication systems vanished. No alarms, no explosions, simply gone. The Threx fleet, sensing doom, launched everything they had. Missiles, plasma cannons, railguns. But the warship did not move. It did not need to. Every single attack vanished before reaching the target. And then, the warship spoke. You have been judged. The voice was calm, emotionless, final. The Threx rulers barely had time to scream before the final pulse was unleashed. The entire planet shook. Mountains collapsed. Cities crumbled. The sky turned black as reality itself seemed to bend. And then, they were gone. The Threx Dominion no longer existed. Across the galaxy, the fear turned into pure terror. The warship was not just an anomaly. It was a force of nature. It was delivering justice in a way no one had thought possible. Every empire that had built itself on war and conquest now feared the inevitable. Who would be next? Who would be judged? And most importantly, could anything stop humanity's warship?